But what if these emerging nations see a global collapse is coming and they start working to prevent it from affecting them? Hey everyone, welcome to Campbell's Coins. I am super psyched about this video because it dives into my background on foreign policy. The dollar losing its status as the world's reserve currency has been happening for a long time. I could have made this video 5 years ago. I could make it a year from now. It's an ongoing process you'll continually see happen. The death of the dollar hasn't been abrupt, but it is a gradual process. Think of a death by 1,000 cuts. But in the last 6 months, a lot of things have occurred which might accelerate this event. Since Bretton Woods, the United States dollar has been the world's reserve currency. In 1945, we set up an agreement with Saudi Arabia, making the US dollar the standard currency used to pay for oil globally. In exchange, we agreed to protect Saudi Arabia and their interests. Other exporting countries eventually started to accept the dollar as payment for oil too. Since Bretton Woods, a global monetary system has been created, and it has been used as a weapon against countries who do things the United States disapproves of. The SWIFT system is a messaging system set up between world banks to communicate with one another. It wasn't created as a weapon, and it's supposed to be a neutral entity. But it has been turned into a monster of its own. Russia is the latest country affected by being blocked from using the SWIFT system. Those countries who have been blocked and later let back on, or those who have seen other countries blocked out of it, have wondered why get involved in a system which can control them. I think a lot of countries have taken notice of the actions of the United States or of the UN and our monetary system. They see us trying to control countries and are asking why they should bother with the system that tries to control them. 2023 can be noted in the history books as another nail in the coffin of the US dollar as the world's reserve currency. Many countries are realizing they don't need or want the dollar. So you'll come across 3 types of thinkers in regards to emerging markets like China and India. The first is that the economic center of the world will shift to China and this region in the next decade. This is projected by investors like Ray Dalio and others. The second is that China will be an effectively dead country in a decade due to their policies and birth rates. These thinkers state that the aggressive actions of Russia with Ukraine and China with Taiwan are the acts of a desperate country in its death throes. So who do you believe? The optimistic economist, driven by persuading people to invest so that they make money? Or the doom and gloom think tank member whose predictions are blinded by their own infallible hubris? The third person knows that those in power don't like to give it up, at least not without a fight. So does this lead to a global war? A global collapse? With everything tied to the dollar, a global collapse is more likely. But what if these emerging nations see a global collapse is coming and they start working to prevent it from affecting them? As I mentioned before, the ditching of the dollar has been going on for a very long time. In 2018, Pakistan replaced the dollar with the yuan in direct trade and investment with China. That same year, India announced it was purchasing Iranian oil in rupees. The Turks dumped the dollar to conduct trade with China, Russia, and Ukraine, all in their respective currencies. In 2022, India started buying Russian concrete with Chinese yuan. A day after the United States' horrible withdrawal from Afghanistan, Russia and Saudi Arabia signed a deal for joint military cooperation. Up until this point, the United States protected Saudi Arabia. More recently, Ghana announced it was going to buy oil with gold. Does any of this signal the death of the dollar? No. Oil and gold are still priced in dollars, but you can start to see a lot of things shift. Last week, China brokered an historic truce between Iran and Saudi Arabia. China's leader, Xi Jinping, met with Putin in Moscow on Tuesday to discuss peace with Ukraine and ushering in what they call a new era of cooperation, the likes of which have not been seen in 100 years. What is the U.S. doing? Well, We're sending currency that we don't have, that our children will be paying for, our children's children, and we're sending weapons to that region. Not exactly the actions of a nation looking for peace. But more importantly than all of this is the number of nations applying to join BRICS. BRICS is an acronym coined by Goldman Sachs for a group of countries who set up an economic agreement between themselves: Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Other countries have applied to be part of BRICS too, including Mexico, Saudi Arabia, Iran. Remember, China just smoothed over relations between these two nations. Egypt, Turkey, Nigeria, and Argentina. If I'm missing one or two, my apologies. The original BRICS nations account for over 40% of the world's population. If they accept these other nations, it could easily push it over half the world's under BRICS. Why is this important? Well, I believe these countries are fed up with the United States and U.S. economic policy. The West moved off the gold standard decades ago and ran up money printing and debt. Debts that we can't pay. The system works as long as people believe it works. And that's what they're hoping for. The moment people realize the dollar for what it is, that's the moment the system fails. Now, I'm not saying the currency used by other nations is better than the dollar. It's not. Nearly every nation on this planet is guilty of irresponsible monetary policies. But if the BRICS nations create a new currency, whether digital or physical, and back it against gold, it will be a game ender for the U.S. and other world nations unless we shift in that direction too. All of these countries that I've mentioned under BRICS and those who applied to BRICS, their central banks have been buying up gold like crazy over the last decade. In 2021, central banks around the world bought a total of 463 tons of gold. That's 82% more than 2020. In 2022, central banks purchased 1,136 tons of gold, which is 152% more than 2021, and the highest amount of gold purchased in over 55 years. Central banks now own over 36,000 metric tons of gold, and that's a little bit more than 1/5 of all the gold ever mined. It certainly appears like they are positioning themselves to be under a gold standard. Although, with South Africa and Russia as the original members, I think it would be really interesting if they put themselves under a platinum standard, since those two countries account for over 85% of the world's platinum supply. Moving away from the US dollar as the world's reserve currency seems likely. If you thought inflation was bad now, just wait until all these countries, who no longer need to use the US dollar for transactions, ship that currency back to the US. We would be flooded with hard currency, and it would be really bad for us. Except I don't think policymakers will let the public see this happen. Instead, I could see them making physical cash null and void overnight all over the world. And the switch to a central bank digital currency would occur. With a digital currency, you can't see how much cash is really out there because it's not physical. This switch would probably occur on a Thursday or Friday because banks are closed over the weekend. You wouldn't be able to access your funds. The most important takeaway from this video is that the death of the dollar doesn't need to happen, but it would require the United States to become fiscally responsible and to stop bullying other nations. This won't happen because our elected leaders keep to the status quo. None of what I've mentioned is the immediate end of the dollar, but it does show that countries are active in moving away from the dollar. A tiny cut doesn't kill a man, but a death may result from 1,000 of these cuts. Your time is your most precious asset, and I appreciate you spending it here with me. Thank you all for watching. This is Campbell's Coins, and that is my 2 cents.